This is VolcaKnowledge, the podcast where we explore how volcanoes interact across nature, culture, and society. I'm your host, volcanologist Sam Mitchell, and every episode I'll be joined by a new guest to get their unique perspective on the world of volcanoes and geology through the eyes of art, history, media, education, industry, and so much more. If you're watching, thanks for watching. If you're listening, thanks for listening. Remember, you can catch all of our episodes on many streaming platforms. Let's go and meet our guest. Enjoy the episode. The saying goes that every stone tells a story. Pick up a pebble on a beach and that single rock has been shaped for millions of years, but also even just by you touching it today. But those tales are not just one of physical science. Rocks have been communicating with us throughout cultural history, weaving a vast geoheritage all around the world in many different ways and through many different stories. So here to talk to us more about the whispers of rock, spoiler alert, is Dr. Anjana Khatwa, earth scientist, writer and presenter. Anjana, thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of VolcaKnowledge. Hello.
Thanks for calling me in, Sam, to talk about this amazing book that I've just written. It's lovely to be here.
We have jumped straight into it. We are very, very excited that you have this book coming out called The Whispers of Rock. So before we get into that, a couple of very quick fire questions. First of all, a favourite volcanic place that you visited?
Oh, wow, you're really spoiling me because I have been to some incredible places across the world. Probably one of my most memorable places has been going to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, and particularly a place called the Pu'ulula petroglyphs, which are these
Yes.
incredible carvings on top of the basalt lava flows. And when I went there, probably about 15 years ago, I just found it the most incredibly moving experience.
It's a very, very special site, that one. It really is incredible. So the second one, volcanic place you have always wanted to visit and not quite made it yet.
Wow, I really hope I get to realize this dream of mine. I would love to go to Mount Fuji in Japan. And the reason for that is because it's just such a manifestation of kami, spirits of nature. And I think it represents for me that beautiful synthesis between science and spirituality.
And that's almost a perfect lead into, I think, everything that we're going to cover today. Science and spirituality, both from personal experiences and perspectives, but also from other people. So we're going to talk a lot about your book today, which very, very exciting. Just so people know what is the exact date, I think we should be releasing this just after it's published. But it should be early
Oh, thanks,
September.
Sam. Yeah, it's here it is. This is the proof copy.
There we go.
It's the Whispers of Rock, Stories from the Earth, and it comes out on the 4th of September, 2025 in the UK, and in the US it comes out on the 4th of November, about 2 months later.
Fantastic. Where's the best place for people to either buy this or access it? Have you got any particular recommendations?
Yes, of course. I would highly, highly recommend that you support your independent bookseller if you can. They always need your business because they're competing with those big giants. If you are shopping online, bookshop.org in both countries, US and UK, support independent booksellers. And then, of course, it's available from all usual bookseller outlets like Waterstones, Barnes and Noble, and so on.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, there we go. We've done the shameless plugging and where people need to go. So, Angela, take us through your background and where you've got to this point because you are an earth scientist, but now you're in a very, very different kind of place that most people would consider, a classic earth science, a sort of, career and sphere. So, what's been your journey to this point?
Well, it's been a long journey, I have to say. I turned 50 this year, just by
Happy
reference
birthday.
point. So I thank you. So I started off as somebody who always loved science. I was this kid who was fascinated with space. I have to say, if things had been a little different, I'd be an astronaut on the space station right now. It didn't turn out that way, fortunately. But I was always interested in science, and then ended up on doing a degree in earth sciences at Kingston University in London, and then was super keen to continue that journey, and then did a PhD at the University of Southampton at the Department of Geography. And there I kind of studied glacial geology because I was really interested in geotechnical engineering and deformation mechanics of sediments. So I went off and did that at Southampton. and then spent 4 years in the US working as a postdoc on so many different projects. They were so diverse, ranging from looking at the collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet. This was
Wow.
way back in 2000, all the way through to modeling nuclear waste,
Okay.
kind of
So,
seeing.
so you said diverse, but
I know. I was working on a project at the Department of Geology at the University of Utah, modeling nuclear waste leakage into groundwater systems in Nevada due to tectonic activity like earthquakes. And then I think the transformational point for me was doing an internship with the US National Park Service, and that was for about a year and a half under a special program that they have called Geoscientist in the Park. Realized that I actually really loved A, being outdoors, and B, talking to people about how wonderful the natural environment was. And it was there at the National Park Service that I really learnt the art of interpretation and engagement, and then came back to the UK, where I spent 15 years at the Jurassic Coast World Heritage Site, leading on public engagement and learning. Um, and then kind of finished that job about 5 years ago, worked in museums for 3 years as an inclusion and engagement specialist. And now I have this incredible role at the National Trust, where I'm head of inclusion and belonging in a job share role, where I'm leading the National Trust into quite a brave and courageous new strategy where everyone is welcome at all of our places.
amazing. Really, really quite the journey. And I love hearing about people's transitions from, physical academic science into something else. And I think nowadays being able to connect with people and the general public in the sphere of earth science, it's become more and more important, particularly over the past decade or so, to make not just people understand the science, but how they feel about the science in the natural world is such an important part of communicating it. Normally, I think, previously science communication has been pitched as this one-way traffic sort of system where I've got a piece of science and you're going to learn about this. But I'm going to teach it you in a very nice way, which is great. But now I think we're really, honing in on that we have to understand people's emotions. We have to empathize with what they're taking from the stories we tell them. And I imagine
Yeah, and
yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
it's good. No, I was just going to say, I imagine it's something that's formed quite an important part of what you've gone on to do.
Yeah, I think that whole aspect of listening and learning from the audiences who you want to engage, that's been a very big part of my career. That was a lot of the work that I did at the Jurassic Coast. It was, we understand that actually when we're talking about deep time, that is a very incoherent and very intimidating message for a lot of people who are particularly those who are new to science. And so I was always thinking about really creative ways, innovative ways in which we can kind of tell stories that engage the hearts and minds of the people that we want to bring into our world.
Amazing. And so, where did the switch happen to it? Because you've done some presenting work. I know you've done a lot of public facing work. Where did that change happen? Where either you were approached by someone, or maybe you reached out to go, I'm going to write a book.
That's a great question. I've really spent I think the last 25 years as a really frustrated earth scientist, if I'm honest. I have been working in TV probably since, goodness me, 2015, even 2013, I think, before that, as a contributor. So quite often I'm asked by the BBC or different program producers to come onto a show and add a little bit about the geology, which adds depth and interest to that program. But to actually secure a series or anything beyond that, I was just getting knockback after knockback, and the big comment I kept getting back, the common comment was, it's just not interesting enough. I don't think the viewers are going to be interested because it just seems a little dull. And so when you are kind of pushing against that door and pushing against that broader opinion that geoscience, earth sciences is a subject that's too difficult to comprehend for the public to comprehend, that's when I kind of really began to move into a space was, well, if I'm not getting anywhere in the space of broadcast, maybe I need to put my ideas down in words and actually write a book about how I feel,
Yeah.
because I was getting really, really frustrated. So in 2021, I entered a competition called the Nan Shepherd Prize for nature writing.
Ah,
And essentially, that's a submission of a book proposal. So that's the kind of your chapter summaries, and also a sample chapter. So I entered that competition with what was the original kind of idea that I had. It was called the Rock Whisperer, And it was a story all about my journey into earth sciences and how I felt about the rocks around me. That book proposal was longlisted, and then I didn't go any further in the competition, but that was enough to secure me
Yeah.
the interest from a literary agent, and his name is Richard Pike at C&W Literary Agency. He absolutely could see in the book proposal a wonderful story that he and I could work on that would eventually then become the Whispers of Rock Stories from the Earth. And it's probably no surprise to those who follow me on social media or have seen some of the press out, but the book sold for an extraordinary six-figure sum around about December 2021, which is phenomenal, I think, for a
Incredible.
debut author, woman of color, writing about rocks. To secure a six-figure sum for a non-fiction book is pretty much unheard of these days. So I am incredibly grateful to the journey that the mentoring journey that my agent took
Yeah.
me on to complete that. And that's where we are now. The book took 2 years to research and write, and it's getting phenomenal reviews because it's written from the heart, and that's where
Yeah.
it begins.
Amazing. Well, and you featured so many voices and stories from around the world. And I think that's quite interesting. You said it was originally called The Rock Whisperer, and then it became The Whispers of Rock. So it's almost reversed the perspective on almost who's telling the story. Like, I've read some of the samples from the book, very generously, that you've provided, and you've weaved this wonderful way of sharing your personal experiences, cultural background, the places that you've been to, but it's never overshadowing, what nature is physically telling us and what is embedded in other people's cultures.
That's a really perceptive observation because for me, the book was always about the rocks. And I think even as we move into the future, this story is never about me. It's always about the rocks who have been overshadowed for so long, having a chance to come forward and tell their stories. I just so happen to be the incredibly privileged person to put their words, their stories, into pages of this wonderful book. So I'm incredibly indebted to the incredible geological entities across the world, but also the people, the scientists, and the indigenous people, and the people from the global majority who have shared with me their incredible observations, feelings, and ancestry to help bring this book to life.
Exactly. There's a really nice quote that I've just picked out here, which highlights exactly what you've said there from the book, which is that writing the stories of Indigenous people and heritage is an honour and a privilege that carries immense responsibilities. And it's just a really nice way of framing your acknowledgement of the contributions that others and communities have given to this book.
I think that's so vital when you are drawing upon memories and experiences of people who have historically experienced significant harm, particularly from colonial violence. And I think when we as non-Indigenous people enter that world, it's we have to recognize the privilege that we have in the Western world in doing that. And I think the book is all about readdressing that balance of power and who has that power ultimately, and what can we do in the Western world to kind of open our hearts and minds, and particularly, be grateful actually for all of these communities sharing their wisdom with us, because I think that wisdom has the power to reshape our engagement and relationship with the natural world.
Exactly, and it's something I've touched on in a couple of previous episodes as well, but also the power of Indigenous narratives and contributions actually now to academic science. So now as well, it's really being valued a lot more in almost helping to fill in some of the gaps where we maybe don't even have a physical record, or we don't have documentation through the classic academic approaches, but there is so much information. It might not be exactly tied to a specific date or time, but it helps fill in a picture of what has happened in maybe this place over the course of recent history.
Yeah, I agree. I think the indigenous stories and so much of that wisdom from global communities, people of the global majority, what we're talking about is a memory of human experience. So people who have actually lived through, in this case, volcanic eruptions thousands of years ago. Some of these stories, document the human experience going back 30,000 years. They have just been passed on through such creative and beautiful ways, whether that's story, song, dance, legends. And I think when we begin to put that alongside the science, it gives us a sense of humanity, that actually these natural processes exist hand in hand with our own existence.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a nice tie in. We as humans, we experience life and sentience, but when we see nature from a similar perspective, particularly the rock cycle, if we treat that as a living, breathing thing, entity that exists in the world, and you see things in a very different way. So there's another extract from a. You'll have to correct me on the context of it, of a poem by Jack Forbes that I just wanted to read out and share with everybody, and maybe afterwards you can tell us exactly where that's come from. So here we go. So don't kid me, my friend. Rocks change, rocks move, rocks flow, rocks combine. Rocks are powerful friends. I have many. Big and small, their processes at our temperatures are very slow but very deep. I understand because, you see, I am part rock. I eat rocks, rocks are a part of me. I wouldn't exist without the rock in me. We are all related. I
I
love that.
just think I just think every time I hear those words, I get goosebumps because I think Professor Jack Forbes, who was at the University of California, he set up a school of Indigenous studies, and I think he was a pioneer of his time. He was one of the very first people to begin to articulate within the academic circles this belief system about animacy in the natural world. And I just that poem, I discovered it in a journal paper actually, and when I read it, I just thought I have to have this to open the book. I couldn't imagine anything else to open such a
Yeah.
powerful book which centers Indigenous voices.
Amazing. And so within the book, obviously, you touch on various different chapters and different aspects of geology and earth science. Um, but where is this kind of taken you? Both, I mean, physically, did you travel a lot to gain the book, or was a lot of it done as kind of like exterior research? Because I know you've traveled about, obviously, throughout the course of your career, but were you traveling as well during the process of writing?
Yeah, I did have to travel a lot because what I was discovering was that as I was writing certain aspects of the book where I would have a case study, for example, about Petra in Jordan, I would sit there and I would look at YouTube videos of somebody walking through the Sikh and thinking, can I write about the formation of the Sikh and of the treasury, which is the beautiful facade in Petra. And I just kind of felt quite removed from that process. I thought, yes, I can talk about the geology in that scientific sense, but actually the human emotion that you need as a writer to bring your words to life, I needed to be there. And so this was reflected probably in some of the more impactful stories in the book. I have actually had to go to the places to commune with the rock, to feel them, to touch them, to understand their stories in person. And the book took me to all sorts of different places across the UK, from North Wales all the way through to Cornwall, Devon, my own home of Dorset, all the way up north as well. Um, but across the world, some of the locations I went to, like Petra in Jordan, like southern Kenya, I think those locations were particularly important for me because it brought to life some really significant parts of the story where I can demonstrate how, if you do listen to the rocks, you do gain that sense of connection back.
Yeah, and you spoke to this particularly within the volcanic chapter as well. Is returning to the lava flow field that you first visited as a young teenager. So I guess being able to go back to these places now with a completely different mindset must be kind of very rewarding, but also like a spiritual experience.
It's incredibly moving, the whole kind of organizing that visit. So I went to my parents are from Kenya, and I went back with my mum to Nairobi about 2 years ago as part of the research for this book. So I then spent 4 days in the national park where the lava flows are on my own, actually. And again, quite an interesting experience to be there solo as a writer. Um, but going out back to the Shaitani lava flows where I went as a teenager, it was an incredibly moving experience. I was with a team of people who took me there because it's quite a remote location, not particularly safe either. And if you read the book, you'll learn more about the people that accompanied me on that trip. But when I walked across those lava flows, it was this extraordinary moment of a circle being closed, because not only do I have photographic evidence of me there as a 13-year-old, there was a family photo taken on that day, but I also picked up a rock on that day as well, which I've kept for my whole life. And
Mm.
so, it was returning back to the exact location 35 years later, from where I was a teenager with a dream, thinking this is what I'd like to do. Have no idea how I'm going to do it. Have no idea how my parents are going to react. All the way through to returning, writing a book about that experience. It was absolutely surreal, magical. I mean, I cried a lot, I think, when I went back there and
That's
had
expected.
these. Yeah, and it was an incredibly moving experience. I just felt the rocks embracing me again, as if they were holding me in a space to thank me for coming back and recognizing the huge impact they've had on my life.
Yeah, and there's aspects in there, talking about familial connection. When we're communicating with people, we talked before about, getting people to share the or to experience the emotion about earth science. It's not necessarily always about hold this rock, what does this rock make you feel? Because
Yeah.
to, the person, as you say, entering the world of geology and earth science for the first time, that's quite a hard thing to connect with. We're trained as earth scientists to understand the world around us in many different ways. But I think if you make people find their personal connection to the natural world, then that really helps embed. And that might be, as you say, where you grew up, or a familial connection, or a cultural upbringing. There's many different ways that we can connect people to the natural world.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also really important to realize that as scientists, what I found over the years is that there can be quite a supremacist way of thinking. Like, science is the only way that you can experience this aspect of the natural world. We must know about how this formed, or what the name of this rock is. And actually, I think what lies hand in hand with that is our own personal experience and memory of what that rock holds for you. And I think, so many people that I've met throughout my career will show me, oh, I picked this pebble up on a beach, or I went to this place, and this is what I came away with. I've had it in my pocket, and I keep it there because it helps me to hold on to that memory or that experience. And I think all of those personal connections that you have to the natural world are just as valid as our scientific interpretation. And I think this is what our ancestors did, didn't they? They were
Yeah,
living in those landscapes, they were watching it, change and evolve over time, and they were recording that either through petroglyphs or cave painting, or stories or song. And I think science is richer for those stories. Science is richer for having that human experience. And I think what we need to do is bridge that, rebuild those bridges between those experiences, so we can help people to feel that love and connection with the rocks around them.
exactly, exactly. I remember some of the time that I spent out in Hawaii, and I was out there studying volcanoes as part of my research, part of my studies. But over the course of the years, my perspective changed so much just by speaking
Mm,
to my local friends who were brought up with native Hawaiian upbringings, particularly through, the art of hula, and as they
mm,
call it, the mo'olelo, which is their storytelling, their narrative process.
mm.
And one thing that was really important to me is it made me change my perspective on the word of stories, because stories is, sometimes something that people have written down, but this was, I'm trying to think of the way to express it, almost like a place of belonging within your own natural world and environments. And I basically opened my mind up as to what science in the physical world can be, and my experience out there was made richer by opening myself up to understanding the tie of the native Hawaiian people to their environments.
And I think what that also does is it connects you. So, as scientists, we look at the geological world through a specific frame, through a specific lens. And what I found quite often is that's often through a very extractive lens. It's like, well, what can we gain from the rocks that will help us as scientists to either progress our scientific understanding of how the world evolved and changed, or are there minerals that we could use, or is it this resource that will help us in our endeavors? And I think once you begin to open your heart and listen to different ways of knowing about the geological world, and in this case it's indigenous native Hawaiian communities, what we begin to gain a sense of is a sense of love, which then fosters a sense of custodianship, that actually, yes, the rocks do give us all these incredible gifts. They gift us with the knowledge of science and understanding about how the world has evolved in a very specific way. They give us minerals, they give us resources. But I think through emboldening a sense of love for where we are, what we experience, it does engender that sense of custodianship. You want to care for it, you want to look after it, you want to ensure that we have stories and songs about that particular place for thousands of years from now, so that our future descendants have a chance to feel the way that we do feel.
Exactly. And even just by you documenting your journey, experiencing and processes, that's also a continuation on for, decades, hundreds of years time, when the whispers of rock is a dusty old tome on some bookshelves in thousands of years time, an ancient scroll.
I, yeah, but most likely it will be. But I think you're absolutely right. I think the stories that I tell in the book, and it is the indigenous stories. But what I've also done is I've crafted a voice for the rock itself. So what you'll find, if those listeners do go out and read the book, what you'll find is that I, as a storyteller, step away from the limelight just for a few moments, and what I do is I allow the rock to come forward and tell its own story in its own words. And I think those are perhaps some of the most moving parts of the book, because what I've done is I've looked very carefully at the science, I've looked very carefully at the setting of that rock, about its, perhaps its archaeological or its indigenous history, and I've blended all of that together to create a voice for the rock. And what the rock does is, well, we both, I as the narrator of the story and the rock as the protagonist, we have a conversation about how it might be feeling, or where, how it feels about humanity and the way it's been treated, or how it's ended up in a museum. So all of these kind of stories, which very much are centering the voice of the rock, they are just as equally valid as my own story, or that of the scientists, or that from indigenous knowledge.
VolcaKnowledge is proud to be sponsored by John Wainwright & Co. through Wainwright Aggregates, and Brunton, Wyoming, making the world's most reliable compasses, professional transits and navigational tools. Since founding in 1891, John Wainwright & Co. are one of Southwest England's largest independent quarrying companies. As well as extracting and processing premium basalt from their quarry in Somerset, they produce construction materials and operate a successful contracting division. Let's hear from some of their employees.
My name's Duncan. I am a weighbridge operative and also work in the asphalt plant. Essentially, a weighbridge operative is a receptionist for lorry drivers. So they'll come into me, I'll book them in for whatever product they need, they'll go off, get loaded, they'll then come back to me, I'll print off a ticket and send them on their way. Yeah, so since I started with John Wainwright's, I completed an apprenticeship. It gives you a really good overview of the industry as a whole, and you'll learn a lot that isn't specifically to do with your job role. It gives you a really good overview of not only the jobs that you're doing, but also all jobs applicable to the quarry industry, different types of quarries, different roles within the quarries, ways of progressing within the industry once you're established. They're really good at listening to you. So if you have a certain area you want to progress into or a skill you want to learn, they'll certainly look to train you in that and open up the opportunities to move around the quarry.
And maybe just think of something then, we have these movies such as Night at the Museum where everything comes to life. The rocks never come to life though. Why do the
No,
rocks
they
never come to
don't.
life?
I don't know. No one, yeah, the producers and directors didn't see the animacy of The Rock, but for sure they probably are the best stories.
So there we go. There's a sequel in the making.
A film
um,
adaptation, who knows?
there we go. we'll pitch that later on. But I'm also curious about, is there anything that surprised you along the way of this process? Maybe if it's about yourself or certain experiences or discoveries.
There was so many things that came out of the research and the writing of this book that we could be here for hours, as you can imagine. But one key element that I was absolutely blown away by was the commonality of how I felt, and I've been brought up as a Hindu, within that faith, but how I felt about the natural world as being an animate part of my life, my spiritual life, and also how that was reflected in communities across the world. So I spoke to First Nations people in Australia, I spoke to Maori people in New Zealand, I spoke to Native American people in North America, and we were all united in this belief system that the rocks speak to us. They are part of us, they are part of our beings. And perhaps one of the most profound experiences I had recently in March, just this year in 2025, was I was able to go to Portland, Oregon for a conference, an anthropology conference. And I made friends with two geologists online from the Geological County of Oregon. They're a geological society in Oregon. And the two gentlemen managed to take me to visit one of my contributors, Travis Stewart, who is a member of the Grand Ron tribe, and he has a Chachalu Heritage Centre and Museum on the tribal reservation. And so I went to see him, and that story about his ancestor called Tamanawas is revealed in chapter 10 of the book. And Tamanawas is a 4.5 billion-year-old meteorite, and it
Hmm.
fell to Earth 20,000 years ago. And Tamanawas goes through all sorts of tribulations and desolation. And suffice to say that Travis at the Chachalu Cultural Centre has managed to secure the repatriation of some of the remains of his ancestor. And I was able to go there with these two colleagues, two geological colleagues. And when I held the remains of his ancestor, in scientific terms, it was the meteorite, it was fragments of the meteorite. But when I held the remains of his ancestor, of his people, it was the most incredibly moving experience of my life. In fact, I feel quite choked up talking about it, because in that moment I was holding the meteorite, and I thought, yes, I can understand the significance of this, because it's
Yeah.
a meteorite, it's a body from space. But more than that, it was part of Travis's ancestry, his descendants. For the future, will always look upon Tamanawas as this traveler from space, as a sky traveler, because that's what Tamanawas means in his language. And that moment when our eyes met, I was holding the remains of his ancestor in my hand, and I met his eyes, and we both knew that this is how we felt about rock. It's more than just a material entity, it is part of our beings. And as Professor Jack Forbes says in that poem, it is really genuinely part of us. And that was possibly the most profound moment I've had in the experience of writing this book, researching it. And yeah, it just so surprising. I never thought I would feel like that, because when I started the journey, I was coming into it from a very different space, and
Yeah.
coming out as someone who has been incredibly moved, uh, spiritually and emotionally, to look at rocks more than what they physically are. That's been extraordinary, actually.
And as you say, even just by if someone had just handed you that rock, you would have probably got a wow. And someone tells you,
Yeah.
what it is physically, there's still a wow factor in there. But without that context from the person itself, you would not have been enriched
Yes.
in that way. And that's, if people want to take away anything from this, I think it's so important to, wherever you go around the world, even if you don't have the privilege of being able to make contact with somebody in person, look at the cultural history
Mm.
around the environments you're in, and to try and see it from that different perspective.
I think that's such a valuable perspective in it, and it's such a wonderful outcome of the book, because I think a lot of the reviewers have said they do now walk through the world in a very different way. In fact, one of the reviewers said she looks at pavements in a whole through a whole
Yeah.
new lens, and I just thought that was wonderful, because I think what the book does is it opens up your eyes to finally see what has been hidden in plain sight for so long. I've always said this, I'm an advocate for the rocks. I always feel like they've been hard done by, if you like. We hear so much in the media about trees, about birds, about now,
Mhm.
the rivers, even with Robert Macfarlane's new book. And for me, I always just wanted to champion the voice of the rocks and to help people see them for what they really are, and to actually connect and feel a sense of belonging when they are with them and when they are surrounded by them.
Wow, it's really, 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 really profound to be able to shape it in that way for people. And I think it also just goes to show how this kind of career can take you on a different path. And to open up your mind, I always say to people, if you do a degree in earth science or geology, you'll never, walk through a valley or walk down, a pebble beach the same way, because you have that understanding from a physical perspective of the cycles and the system processes that have shaped our planet. But this is almost then like the next level.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
you
it
don't.
is. It really
But
is.
but I think I'm going to reverse my own point in that you don't have to actually have the physical science background to understand the appreciation of everything that you've talked about within this book as well. You can come to this book from a hard physical science background, or someone from a member of the general public who doesn't have any science background whatsoever, and still hopefully come to the same feeling and emotion.
Yeah, I have totally seen that with people that I've spoken to about the book. So I do a lot of public speaking in my role, and I have this amazing job where sometimes I lecture on cruise ships,
Mm.
and my audiences on the cruise ships are wonderful people. They're retired mostly. They have not spent a life in science, majority of them. And when I've delivered my talks about geology and earth science, they have completely come to a new place of understanding, in that, this is a world that you can step into if you open your heart and your mind. And yes, the book does talk about the geoscience. It uses language in a very accessible way, but what it does is, because it weaves in very personal narratives and very global narratives of how different people from different communities have understood geology, it welcomes you with open arms. It's an inclusive book, dare I say it,
Yeah.
because it begins from the very first chapter, which is called The Rock Whisperer, begins with two women at Stonehenge who are not scientists. They are just there to enjoy the solstice. And I'm there, obviously, to do some research for the book. But they feel resonance, they feel connection with the stones in a way that's different to me. But both of our views are valid. And so for these two women, I call them rock whisperers, because their views are equally as valid as mine. And I think if we can build a community of rock whisperers all over the world, wouldn't the world be a better place, because the rocks are finally seen and listened to?
There we go. And I think we need T-shirts as well for that.
We need some merch.
Yeah, there is a merch. So there we go. That's your next step for the marketing team.
Yeah.
Merch after the book. But looking at some of the chapters, like you said as well, you've also weaved in this nice bit of actual geoscience education in there as well, particularly within the volcanic chapter. And it was not that it was a surprise, but I almost didn't expect to see that kind of teaching in there. But it's nice because it gives you the physical science context, but then helps you reframe it in a different way. And I think for a general reader, it's almost like stealth geology education. And I honestly think that's our way forward for connecting the broader public with geology, is you bring them in through a different sphere and then just, drip feed every now and again the bits of the scientific background.
Again, that's so perceptive of you, Sam,
I can
because
be quite perceptive.
yeah, I'm really impressed. I come from that background. So at the Jurassic Coast, I mean, I was learning manager for 15 years. So my job was literally to work with teachers at primary and secondary level to help them be inspired by the geology and to build it into curriculum learning. And so when I was
Awesome.
writing the book, I was absolutely committed to helping people learn about this incredible science, but I didn't want to do it in a way that isolated them. And so I always felt that I needed to add humanity into the scientific stories, to add a level of art and beauty and feeling and emotion, and that would then draw you into this world where you would subtly pick up the science as you went along. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, I think we could go for hours talking about this, but there's a couple of things I will do for us to wrap up. You shared a really, really nice, one of your kind of like favorite memories and experiences. Is there any advice, just in general, that you might have to people pursuing a career within, earth sciences and geosciences, but also where that could take you?
I think my career is extraordinary. I've gone from a research scientist through to somebody working in geoconservation to now, and public communication of science, all the way through to writing this first book. I don't know where it's going to take me next. I embrace it. And I think the advice I would give anyone is you have to feel that genuine sense of love and connection with what you do, because when the chips are down and when times are very, very hard, and when you read the book, you will discover some of the obstacles I faced. It's your love and your joy and your passion for what you do that will carry you through. Absolutely. And, the second thing that I would reiterate is always ask for help. Always
Hmm.
ask for help, because when you do feel like all is lost, or you are struggling, or you can't see a way through, people will help you. People will come and help you and get you back up on your feet so you can achieve the goal that that you're dreaming of. So those are the two things I would say.
Amazing. Well, just as one last plug as well, we'll obviously put the links for anything that you've spoke to us about today, including the book and also your own socials and your website. But if you want to show us the book one more time,
Okay, here you go,
there we go.
people. This is the UK cover. It's slightly different now because they've changed the subtitle. This is the US cover.
Oh,
So
nice.
those two, 4th of November, 4th of September. So thank you so much. There we go.
No problem.
Both pictures, I was going to say, Sam, both of the photographs on both covers are my own, taken at Petra Archaeological Site.
Oh, I was about to ask, are the photos from different places, but they're both actually from Petra Archaeological Site.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, the final thing I want to wrap up with is, do you have a quote or an extract you'd like to read to us from the book?
Yes, I do. I hope that's okay. It's at the end of the preface, at the start of the book, so it just gives you a sense of what's to come. Through embracing our role as custodians rather than owners and observers, our relationship with the natural world transitions towards one of equity, consideration, and above all, love. From this position, with empathy and humility, we open ourselves to understand and value that different sources of knowledge have the power to entirely reframe our relationship with rock and indeed nature itself. For to touch a rock and hear its whispers is to feel the privilege of a time and space that now only exists in our heart and our mind.
Well, with that, thank you so much for joining us today, Anjana. It's been a real pleasure to be able to share this with everybody.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of VolcaKnowledge, and keep tuning in for future episodes. Thanks for tuning in for this episode of VolcaKnowledge. Remember, you can catch all of our previous episodes either through our website, www.volcaknowledge.com, or you can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you stream your favourite podcasts. You can also watch all of our episodes on our YouTube channel, VolcaKnowledge, and don't forget to sign up to our social media channels at VolcaKnowledge through Instagram and Blue Sky. Please leave us any feedback and comments and topics maybe you want to see on a future episode. Thank you for joining, and see you next time.